In the last section, we reached some conclusions about modules strictly on the basis of resource conservation. Now, let's think about the effects of the need to modify the system. To take this next step, let's first think about how to interpret the role of a module in behavioural terms. The value of a condition detection lies in its association with appropriate system behaviours. So a module detects conditions, but its function can also be interpreted as indicating something about which behaviours are currently appropriate and which are inappropriate. These information and behavioural meanings are essentially two sides of the same coin. Remember, the relationship between modules and system features is not at all straightforward, and there's a major implication to the complexity of that relationship. One module supports lots of different system features, and one feature needs the support of lots of different modules. But now, think about what happens when you try to change a feature. Remember that everything a feature does is actually executed by modules. So if you want to change how a feature works, you'll have to find a module that contributes in a relevant way to that feature. Identify a design change that executes the feature change. But if you carry out that module change, it risks changing the operation of some of the other features supported by the same module, and those changes will be unintended and quite often undesirable. Furthermore, if there's information exchange between modules, the change to one module risks introducing unplanned effects on the modules with which it shares information, and hence on all the features that are supported by those other modules. One thing you can do to reduce these undesirable side effects is to minimize information exchange between modules. But remember that the reason for having information exchange is to reduce the amount of resources needed. So there's a conflict between resource economy and the ability to modify the system without undesirable side effects. So we've come to a further conclusion about physical resource modules. We first concluded that just on the basis of resource economy, they need to be organized into a hierarchy with higher level modules made up of groups of more detailed modules and information exchange to help minimize resource needs even further. But now, on the additional basis that features need to be modified without undesirable side effects on other features, we conclude that information exchange between modules must be minimized as far as possible. And in this situation, as far as possible means as far as possible without needing excessive resources. Now let's have a look at this conflict over information exchange between modifiability and resources in a bit more detail. In this conceptual arrangement of modules, each arrow represents an information exchange. Information exchanges in one way have been significantly limited. In this case, any one module on average only passes information to two other modules. Now, suppose that to implement one feature change, we need to change the module in red. And that will of course risk side effects on all the features supported by the red module. The module passes information to two other modules. So there's a risk that all the features supported by those modules will be affected. Those two modules pass information to three other modules. And because their incoming information may have changed, the information they pass to those three modules may have changed, resulting in possible side effects on the features supported by any of those three modules. Then, those three pass information to yet other modules, including the module that changed in the first place, possibly changing its behavior and that of the others, and so on. So in this simple example, all the modules have been potentially affected, and the cycle of potential changes can go around and round again. so we have to correct for side effects. And this is actually one of the most demanding aspects of the design of complex electronic systems. To make a change, you have to follow the effect of the change through all the possibly affected modules, compensating for the changes, and then test the system, regression testing, to make sure you haven't missed anything, that it still performs all its features correctly. But now, think about the same problem for a complex learning system. It will need modules to economize on resources, just like an electronic system. To learn something new, at least one module will have to change. But again, a change can result in an expanding wave of undesirable side effects. But how could a learning system correct for such side effects? There's no external designer thinking through the effects of changes. The only available information is the consequences that follow each behavior, which could, of course, include feedback from an external teacher, but the external teacher doesn't have direct access to brain circuitry. And the immediately available consequence feedback only refers to the most recent behaviors. So the problem is, suppose the system needed to learn and made an experimental change to a module. There was consequence feedback that confirmed the change was good for the behavior selected. So far, so good. But the change may have effects on all sorts of behaviors that aren't currently being performed. In the past, the system learned the circumstances in which those behaviors were appropriate. But by the time those circumstances occur again, there may have been so many changes to, say, conditions detected by different modules that the system no longer detects the same conditions and doesn't select those behaviors anymore. Of course, there'll be negative consequences, but these alone just show that the behavior just selected was inappropriate. They don't show what alternative behavior is appropriate, the behavior that was performed in the past. This is essentially the catastrophic interference problem encountered in artificial neural networks, where there's a tendency for new learning to erase prior learning. Okay, so does this mean you can't have a system that learns a complex combination of behaviors? Well, obviously you can, because the brain exists. So to begin to understand how a complex learning system can address this problem, we have to think a bit further about what exactly an information exchange between modules means. When information is shared between two modules, the information exchange means that some condition has been detected by, let's say, the red source module, but for the green recipient model, it also has a behavioral meaning. For the green module, the condition detection means that of all the behaviors that are influenced by that green module, only the behaviors in some limited subset could be currently appropriate. So for the recipient module, the condition detection limits the range of possibly appropriate behaviors. Of course, that behavioral meaning will in general be different for each module that receives that same condition detection, even though it's the same condition detection being shared. Now there's another distinction we can make. Let's suppose that this module potentially influences behaviors B1 to B11. And then suppose that it gets a condition detection of the condition C from some other module. That condition detection means that out of the behaviors B1 to B11, only, let's say, B2, B6, B9 and B10 could be appropriate at the moment. In electronic systems, these behavioral meanings are completely unambiguous. In other words, there's 100% confidence that the behavior is limited to the subset. Behaviors outside the subset are completely ruled out. In this situation, a condition detection is an unambiguous instruction that commands something. And as a result, we encounter the presence of instructions everywhere in electronic systems. But conceptually, there's an alternative. Shared condition detections could be meaningful, but partially ambiguous in behavioral terms. In other words, the condition C implies that for the recipient module, the appropriate behavior is probably one of that same set, B2, B6, B9, or B10, and less likely to be one of the others. In this situation, a condition detection is no longer a command, it's only a recommendation. Because condition detections are only recommendations, the system will need a lot more condition detections to ensure that behavioral selections are made with high integrity. And of course, condition detections require resources. So systems using partially ambiguous behavioral meanings will need a lot more resources. So why should you bother? Well, the reason is that using partially ambiguous information exchange meanings reduces the change problem for a learning system. Remember, the change problem is that even if information exchange is minimized as far as possible, a change to one module to modify or learn a feature will generally have undesirable side effects on lots of other modules. If every condition detection has an unambiguous behavioral meaning, it will command behaviors. So any module changes will definitely change system behavior in unpredictable ways. But if condition detections are only recommendations, many condition detections must recommend any one behavior at a certain point in time. Any previously learned behavior will therefore be recommended by all sorts of different condition detections, and each detection could have a different recommendation weight in favor of that behavior. Now, if in the course of learning a new behavior, some conditions recommending a previously learned behavior are changed, they might not be detected next time this previously learned behavior was appropriate. But because so many conditions recommend the behavior, there's a reasonable chance that quite a lot of them will still be detected, and the total recommendation strength could be sufficient. If that's the case, consequence feedback will increase the recommendation weights of whatever conditions are currently being detected in favor of the behavior, compensating for any condition changes since the last time the behavior was performed. All this means that it's feasible to retain earlier learning despite later learning. It's not a guarantee, and changes will still have to be very carefully managed to maintain earlier learning. However, learning a complex combination of behaviors is feasible, unlike the situation in which behavioral meanings are unambiguous. So, despite the resource penalty for using partially ambiguous behavioral meanings, it's the only feasible approach if lots of different behaviors must be learned and the resources aren't unlimited. So we've added another property of modules. Condition detections have unambiguous behavioral meanings in systems designed under external intellectual control. But in a system that learns a complex combination of behaviors, they have to be partially ambiguous.